Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome, everybody, to Nightlight. So glad you could join us. So glad that you would share your time with us. And it's going to be an exciting evening for sure. I want to thank Ken Quiethawk for his amazing intro. Please check him out on the internet. You can find him. He's Ken Quiethawk. And he and his wife have an amazing website. Don't know if that's still up, but you can find him and his stories on the internet, and I highly recommend you check into the Native Storytellers because they have a profound way of preserving history that sits in your memory a lot more easily than textbook material does, so please check it out. Mark has a great show tonight, going to be enlightening and probably a little titillating here and there, but as always, he's got an amazing guest, so Mark, show is all yours.
Thanks. How's everything in your area?
Locked down and quiet.
Okay. Hopefully this show will help people get through the quarantine. Since I'm on the air, Blog Talk's English Robo-Babe must think that I've finally become essential. We have a guest making his debut with us, but Michael Hall is not a stranger to the airwaves. Michael hosts the Sunday night Spaced Out Radio. On Mondays, you can see him on his UFO I-Team on Facebook live stream. On Thursday, the last Thursday of each month, you can see Michael on Introspection, and he's a guest on many other shows. Michael was a vice president of the Puget Sound Christian College. He has earned his doctorate in jurisprudence, which has given him the nickname of the Paranormal Lawyer. He has also worked with MUFON. He's an author and served chicken noodle soup to Frank Sinatra. Hi, Michael.
Hey, Mark. Oh, gosh, that's a great introduction. I really appreciate that. All the way from Sinatra to the Paranormal Lawyer. Love it.
I worked hard on that one.
You did.
So we have a lot to cover for about the next 2 hours. Since you're making your debut with us tonight, I have a feeling you'll be back soon. Want to get to know you a little bit. Maybe some of the listeners don't realize that you were a Super Bowl halftime performer.
Boy, you're digging deep there, buddy. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to see any photos, but if you had a wardrobe malfunction, but what's the story with you being involved with a halftime show?
Well, I tell you, back in the 70s, I was lucky enough to be a cast member for the group Up With People. Traveled literally the world with 120 kids from around the world, from different countries, and we had a 2-hour musical performance that we put on. I think the oldest member of our troupe at that point was a 25-year-old cast director. Everybody else was that or younger, and people don't really probably remember Up With People back then in the Super Bowl days, but we did the most Super Bowls of any group or any individual or band at all during the history of the Super Bowl. We did 5 Super Bowl halftimes, and it was just an awesome experience, obviously, to be on the field. This was the Super Bowl 19. This was the Super Bowl at the Rose Bowl, by the way. I mean, you can't get any better than that as far as a venue goes. This was the Pittsburgh Steelers and the LA Rams at the time, and it was an awesome experience to be on the field and perform for literally, hundreds of people, hundreds of thousands of people, not only on the field but around the world as well. Millions of folks were tuning in to those performances, and it was kind of fun to be able to be a part of that.
Oh, I bet it was. Okay. Very interesting. So, were you singing on the field, or just involved in the stadium?
Oh no, we were singing and dancing to choreography and our own brand of Up With People songs on the field.
Mm-hmm.
And syncing up our activities to the feed that we had from the network. So that was kind of an experience for us to be able to lip sync to our own songs, to make sure we had good audio.
Cool. Sounds like a neat experience. Okay. So, and you've been on a number of other shows talking about the Admiral Wilson memo. What is this memo about? When was it discovered? What administration? What's the story behind that, and what are the consequences of it being made public? Right.
Well, you hit really on a good subject for me to talk about here. This literally has been dubbed by Richard Dolan, the UFO historian, as the major smoking gun memo of the century, as far as what it says and who it was released by, and the names and projects and unacknowledged special access programs that it discusses in this thing. And I just happened to be involved in the memo itself from the very beginning when this whole thing came about. As a matter of fact, one of my clients, Grant Cameron, way back in that was January 2nd of 2019, sent me a encrypted text out of the blue, and initially I'm going, oh my gosh, I had never received an encrypted text before. Didn't know who it was from, didn't know what it was about, and I almost didn't open it up because I was just thinking this is maybe either spam or it's like way important, and maybe I shouldn't know what's going on, but I finally opened it up and found out it was my famous researcher ufologist client, Grant Cameron. Now, it's a very short, cryptic text he sends me. It says, Michael, I'm about ready to drop a major UFO information bomb, and I needed to run it by you as the paranormal lawyer. That's what he said on this text, and I'm just going, wait a minute. If Grant Cameron is telling me that he is about ready to drop a major UFO information bomb, it must be huge. This is the gentleman, by the way, Grant Cameron, who literally in the 1970s uncovered another smoking gun memo from a gentleman in Canada by the name of Willard Miller, who basically was a Canadian official who claimed in this memo that the United States government had told him that UFOs existed. And not only that, but it was the highest classified subject in the U.S. government, higher classified than the atomic bomb at the time. So when Grant Cameron comes across something unique, you know it's going to be quite big. Literally at that point, I finally get a hold of Grant on the phone, and he tells me a most amazing story of him being approached by a gentleman from Australia by the name of James Rigney after one of the conferences that Grant had just been speaking at. Grant gets talked to after his speeches quite a bit, and has lively conversations with the people that listen to his great talks. And James Rigney is telling Grant that he has a document that he thinks he would be very interested in seeing. And Grant says, "Oh, I would love to. I just don't have the time right now. I've got to run out of here and jump on another plane to get to another conference. Can you email it to me?" James Rigney tells Grant Cameron, "Mr. Cameron, all I need is 5 minutes of your time, and I think you will find it very fruitful." So all of a sudden, Grant goes, "Well, okay, I'll give him 5 minutes." And so James Rigney pulls out his iPad mini and pulls up the first page of the Admiral Wilson, what they call smoking gun core secrets memo. And Grant's face goes ashen, literally. He sees names, he sees project names, he sees places and times that he can verify are very significant in the history of ufology. And Grant tells Mr. Rigney, he says, "Where did you get this document?" The basic bottom line is Mr. Rigney got this document from another Australian friend of his who had received Edgar Mitchell's documentation in banker boxes after Edgar Mitchell passed away, the Apollo 14 astronaut, sixth man to walk on the moon. And his family, Edgar Mitchell's family, was not interested in keeping all of these old papers that he had amassed in banker boxes over his long career as a NASA astronaut and involved in, the consciousness studies, the Free Foundation, and NIDS, Robert Bigelow, and all the other things that he had served on the board of directors with. So the Australian decided to help the family out and take the banker boxes, and then James Rigney was the ufologist who knew what to look for in these banker boxes, and came across a 15-page, mostly single-space document, by the way, Mark, that names, programs, things that people were always wondering about, and of course we all have in the back of our minds existed. But just to cut to the chase and tell you what this thing was actually doing, or actually talking about, was it was confirming that there was a crash around 1947 of a major UFO saucer. The retrieval of the alien technology at the time, including alien bodies, dead and alive, and the fact that the U.S. military, under some of these unacknowledged special access programs, had been trying to reverse engineer this alien technology, not of this world, not made by human hands, it says in the memo, and not from another terrestrial source. And it also confirms, supposedly, this document, that the military is in possession of a working craft that can travel through interstellar space, through our atmosphere on the planet, underwater, and through dimensions. That dimension thing really hit me hard when I first saw this document. I literally had access to Grant Cameron's find of this document through James Rigney since January 2nd of last year, 2019. And so I was vetting this document vociferously for months, trying to figure out if there was some misinformation, disinformation, whether it was a hoax or not. And of course, there's a really interesting story about how this document actually was released to the public that we can get into later. But that's the short version of my involvement in the Admiral Wilson Core Secrets document.
Okay, is the memo talking about the Roswell crash, or was it another crash landing at the wrong place?
It does not specifically say the crash at Roswell, New Mexico. No. It says that, matter of fact, Admiral Wilson in this document, just to give people a little idea of how this document is laid out, Admiral Wilson is being interviewed in this 15-page transcript memo by purportedly Dr. Eric Davis, the top-level government scientist who has been involved in many black ops programs, including even Robert Bigelow's National Institute of Discovery Science, colleague of Dr. Russell Targ, a high-level government scientist interviewing Admiral Wilson, who at the time was the Joint Chiefs of Staff, second in command, J2, who was in charge of all of the military intelligence departments of every military branch. And, of course, Admiral Wilson had been briefed previously to that by Edgar Mitchell and Dr. Stephen Greer and others as well that had the inside information that the Admiral himself didn't know about. And so at that point, the Admiral had looked into some of these unacknowledged special access programs that were mentioned to him by Edgar Mitchell and Dr. Stephen Greer, and found out that indeed they existed. And so when Admiral Wilson is now relaying the story to Eric Davis, he says he was actually in the civilian contractor organization in a SIF, a special information or a secret information facility where no electronic devices can be recorded or anything, and talking with that program's administrator, that program's security director, who used to be an NSA officer, as well as the corporate attorney. And these are the three gatekeepers that are telling Admiral Wilson about the things that are included in the memo, including the idea that there was a crash of an alien technology a long time ago, is how it was described, and the fact that there were retrieved alien bodies, both dead and alive, and the actual crashed craft itself, and that they had now been for decades trying to reverse engineer this alien technology and figure out how it works. But because of the stovepiping and the special access that you have to have in clearances to actually work on these projects, the civilian subcontractor and the other scientists from the government have been having a difficult time trying to get to the reverse engineering of this object, because they necessarily had to have only people on the project working for them that were had high clearance, and they didn't necessarily were able to corroborate with other scientists that might be in the know and have a better way of trying to get this stuff understood. So that's what the memo is talking about when it comes to this crashed craft that happened decades ago.
Do we know when Davis's interview took place?
We do. It was, there's a little discrepancy on the actual day, but approximately April 9th of 2002 is when this meeting took place between Dr. Eric Davis and Admiral Thomas Ray Wilson in the back seat of Admiral Wilson's staff car in the parking lot of the EG&G building at McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas, Nevada, is where this actually took place in 2002. They were sitting there and had a meeting that lasted about an hour and 10 minutes, where Admiral Wilson was regaling Dr. Davis of the fact that he was literally shut down by this civilian contractor, not allowing him to have the details that he was asking for regarding UFOs and reverse technology programs, because they said that the Admiral didn't have a need to know. He was not on their so-called bigot list of people who had the need to know. And that, of course, incensed the Admiral, who literally went back to the Pentagon and confronted some of his colleagues and friends there, saying, hey, this subcontractor is stonewalling me and letting me in on the details of what their programs entail, and I am in charge, literally, of their programs. Now, the striking strangeness of that whole story is that Admiral Wilson was told by his colleagues at the Pentagon, this is what's laid out in the memo, by the way, that he needs to drop the subject immediately, not pursue it, and that if he does, he most likely will lose a few stars, be demoted, not get his pension, not get the advancement that he was looking for in the Department of Defense, and never talk about this again. So that's been fascinating as well, is the idea that the people on the know that should know what's going on don't really necessarily know, and these independent subcontractors out there, civilian companies, by the way, are having no oversight, it looks like, from government, congressional, White House, or any other authorities above them, including the military. Very strange.
Yeah, that is strange. So, I'll go into more about the, you being a paranormal lawyer, but just with your legal training, is there anything illegal that can be used to just create doubt about the government saying, this is obtained illegally, it just the evidence can't be admissible. We know that Edgar Mitchell's personal papers were burst. Is there anything about like the Freedom of Information Act? You have Canadian researchers getting this information. Is there anything that can be used to debunk this memo?
Well, there's the real thing that has happened on the release of this memo, which happened literally around June 27th or so of last year, when it all of a sudden appeared on Reddit, on Twitter, and it was released to the public at that point. And there's an amazing story how it actually got there and then got out to the public as well. But what happened shortly thereafter is that everything just went total silence. You would imagine that there were so many people that were mentioned in this memo, so many players like Dr. Eric Davis, Dr. Russell Targ, Admiral Wilson himself, and many other Pentagon employees that are named in this document. You would imagine that some of them would immediately come out and deny that they were ever involved in this memo, or that they said things that were attributed to them. And literally there was nothing heard for months and months. People tried to get a hold of the major players in the document to interview them, and literally they would say, and Russell Targ was one of these, who said that, due to my ongoing government high-level secret classifications, even confirming or denying anything regarding this kind of a core secrets memo is a breach of my security oath. So for a long period of time, there was nothing. Then, very quickly, in the beginning of February of this year, all of a sudden there seems to be some leaked access, some confirmation of these documents that took place, which was very startling to me in the person that was involved with Grant Cameron from the very beginning, because we had never heard anybody talk about the memo. The latest thing that happened, and your listeners might not know of this, but you can literally find Dr. Russell Targ speaking at a conference in West Virginia recently, in February, actually, of this year, where he is asked after the talk that he gives, which was called, by the way, the Department of Defense's Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Program. He's actually talking about the Department of Defense's unacknowledged program of UFOs studies. And at the end of that talk, he is asked some questions from the audience. And one gentleman gets up and literally has the chutzpah at that moment to ask him, what about the Admiral Wilson memo, the core secrets memo that people have been talking about and that you are mentioned in as well, Dr. Targ? Now, he didn't really jump right on that, but he did say some really amazing, revealing things. He said, he repeated the question. He says, that has to do with the Admiral Wilson smoking gun memo, which was released on the internet. And he says, it was my colleague, Dr. Eric Davis, who actually interviewed Thomas Wilson, the Admiral, Joint Chiefs of Staff, second in command, for that memo. He didn't go into the details of the memo itself, and he said that since this seems to be an ongoing program, that he could not make any comment further. But the fact that he actually confirmed that his colleague, Dr. Eric Davis, actually did interview Admiral Wilson and produced this memo was a startling confirmation in itself.
And with technology that you mentioned earlier when you were describing the crash, what has been learned of the technology over the next several decades. Has any of these people just acknowledged? Well, we got this from this 1947 crash landing. Or it just seems like with the crash landing, that in the technology that the scientists discovered, the interdimensional travel and the other things that you mentioned, isn't that like indirectly confirming that the government knows of UFOs? And would some of the products or gadgets that are being used today also have to be admitted, hey, we got this idea from the 1947 crash?
Yes, that's one of those things that all of us in this kind of field have thought of over the years. Literally, if you kind of look at the timeline in general of the idea that if something crashed that was off this world onto our planet back in potentially the 1940s, and we were reverse engineering and studying those extraterrestrial technologies all this period of time, you would think that things like, for instance, the superconductive materials that we're coming up with, the miniaturization, of the transistors down to, chips in your cell phone now, the fiber optics and all those kinds of things seem to have popped up quite quickly. If you put everything into a timeline, even back to, let's say the turn of the century, 1903, when the Wright brothers first were able to get heavier than air flight to work, in its infancy. And it took us quite a bit of time to actually make that a commercial venture. And then in the late 40s, early 50s, perchance, you would see all of a sudden quite a rise in the steep curve of technology, literally to the fact where if indeed we landed on the moon in 1969, less than 63 years or whatever since the Wright brothers were just able to lift off the planet, you wonder what kind of technology was there to help us accomplish those events in such a short period of time.
And it seems like there has to be some indirect acknowledgement. Hey, we found the stuff and in the crash, and that's what within 20 years, we're putting a on the moon. I think you make a really good analogy, from 1903 to 1969. How do you go from like the Wright brothers gliding off a sand dune to landing on the moon? It's pretty fast.
You're right, Mark, and actually that's the whole premise of Colonel Corso's book, Day After Roswell, is all about the fact that supposedly he claims he was in charge of seeding that foreign technology, that he ran the foreign technology division for the military, and supposedly using what they called foreign technology, which was literally off-world technology, to private industry, giving them a foot up on some of the retrieved technologies that that he was in charge of getting out to private industry in that era. And fascinating book. If people haven't not picked up Colonel Corso's book, The Day After Roswell, it's a fascinating study.
Okay, and kind of stick a similar theme, but maybe move in another direction. You've posted some Skywatch videos a couple nights ago that do seem like some flying through the night sky. One, this V-shaped craft. I don't know what to make of that one. And then there was the line of equidistant crafts, something moving through the sky. There's a series of them. Was that your Skywatch video? What's the story behind that?
Yeah, well, that has been real fascinating on that post that we put up on the UFO I-Team Facebook page. People can go there even as we speak now and scroll down and catch those two videos. Let me describe both of them. The most recent one was bizarre. The most recent one almost looks like it could be a flock of birds or geese, way high up in the atmosphere, by the way, flying at night. It's kind of in a V shape, and it kind of like morphs, into different iterations of Vs as it goes by. Our initial analysis of that, and it's not our video, by the way. We've found these videos on the internet and then kind of put them up for people's comment on our Facebook page. Those two videos we're talking about tonight. But that first one, or the latest one, looks as if it could be potentially just a bird flock, quite a large bird flock. But we're still analyzing that one. But the very first one that really has gone viral on the internet, not just on our Facebook page, but all over the place, was literally the latest version of the SpaceX satellites that were released very recently, where you'll see in this video a line of 20 SpaceX satellites that are equidistant from each other, going from maybe the top of the screen at a 1 o'clock position if you're looking at a clock face, across the screen to maybe the 7 o'clock position down at the bottom right left-hand corner. And these satellites seem to be either hooked together or very equally distanced from each other as they are being deployed around the Earth's atmosphere, when all of a sudden the very last satellite in the line of SpaceX satellites almost seems to be attacked by another anomalous object. Comes from potentially the 4 o'clock position on a clock face and strikes up into the maybe 10 or 11 o'clock position against this stream of oncoming SpaceX satellites. And literally, due to some of the enhancements that Cameron Hall on our UFO I-Team has made, where you zoom in and get closer and closer to this video and actually show the closeness of this object coming into the last of that SpaceX satellite images. It almost looks like it's bumping it out of line for a split second as it passes by. And that's been fascinating. This object, the anomalous object, comes out of the middle of nowhere. It doesn't just come off the screen. It just comes... It manifests out of nowhere and then goes right after the last satellite in line and basically disappears into nowhere right after that as well. That's the fascinating part of that. Not necessarily that it's a SpaceX release of satellites, because people are getting used to seeing those now, which are very dramatic in themselves. But the fact is, it looks like one of them was almost being targeted to be taken out by some other object in the night sky. And we were able to enhance that at the UFO I-Team Facebook page, and so people can go there and see that very weird experience that we've shown on a video that had already been posted, but we kind of enhanced it a bit.
Yeah. Like in the first one you discussed, it said there's the possibility that it could be a flock of geese. In the one that you, the second one you described with the objects moving in a equidistant order, it could the sudden appearance that seems to attack the last object in the line could has that been ruled out as a bat, a goose, birds, something like that? Has anything been ruled out, because it is very odd? A fly that landed flew close by the lens. I don't know. I don't have an explanation for it. It's very odd.
Yeah. Well, of course, we don't rule anything out, of course, Mark. But the interesting thing about that object is the fact that it does seem to have some kind of effect on the last satellite that is going by in the line of SpaceX satellites. It literally, if for instance it was a very close bug to the lens of the camera that was capturing those SpaceX satellites, you would expect it not to have any effect at all in satellites in space. It would be just something that would happen to the lens very up close. But in reality, we've enhanced that version of the satellite stream so close that it looks very definitely that something is either pushing that last satellite out of line slightly, or actually hitting it, actually coming in contact with it. So that's fascinating stuff. We're still in the process. Cameron on our UFO I-Team is in the process of trying to get further enhancements of that video, with taking out some of the extraneous, information noise in there with AI, programs that he's got to be able to get a closer view of what really was going on that night. And of course, the other one with the bird flocks, the reason that we're at this point kind of going with the bird flock was that we have to remember that video was actually a FLIR photography, night vision photography, that was also recording the heat signature from these items as well. And when you compare, like we have technical guys on our UFO I-Team, Dave Mason and Lee Strauss and those guys, when they compare the heat signatures that they can get from a flock of birds as opposed to an airplane, as opposed to a star or an anomalous object, it seems to fall in line with their analysis so far that it looks to be like the heat signature of a flock of birds. So we'll see.
Okay, I was really captivated by both videos. I didn't have an explanation for them. It's what you're discussing, about the flock of birds does make sense. It's just, I just want to get your take on it. You have on your Facebook page. It's worth talking about and considering all points of view. But yeah, the second video, I don't have an explanation for that sudden appearance that seems to go after the satellite. But in another interview, you were you spoke about the human resonance with some of the crafts that have been recorded. Did you do any of these videos present that some kind of hertz signal, give off some type of sound frequency? I
yes,
just wonder if anything was recorded on the all the equipment that is used by so many people.
Yes, yeah, definitely. We are kind of finding some new information, we believe, in our sky watches that we do quite often. Matter of fact, just a couple weeks ago, or even last week, since we have all been hunkering down and not going out into the field very often lately, we have done some live sky watches on our UFO I-Team Facebook page where people can actually join us when we are doing sky watches and pointing out anomalous objects in the night sky. But recently we've been finding out that some of these anomalous objects that we're recording on videotape, on night vision, on FLIR photography, on stop action photography, some of these things, we used to think in the old days they just traveled in a straight line, kind of like a satellite. Maybe it was faster or slower than a satellite, and maybe it was not a shooting star. But now that we've got more sophisticated gear and equipment, we are finding that literally these things seem to be traveling in a sine wave, not a straight line, more something that would look like, for instance, the Schumann resonance of the actual planet itself. If people don't understand what that means, the Schumann resonance is I think it's about an 80-mile from the surface of the planet sphere around our own Earth that literally vibrates. The Earth vibrates in a certain tone. They call that the Schumann resonance. It's 7.83 cycles per second, and it can be recorded. And basically everything on our planet relates to that Schumann resonance because we're all from the planet Earth. What we're finding out in some of our recordings now is that when we take the videotape that we've recorded, transfer it to an oscilloscope, and be able to analyze the light wave patterns into sound, that literally these craft that look like they're traveling, they're anomalous, by the way. They're not satellites. They're not shooting stars, and they're not anything that we know of that we can check on our equipment that will tell us that it's space junk or anything. But we're finding out that these objects literally are traveling in the same Schumann resonant sine wave as the planet itself. Our theory could be, at this point, we're thinking if these objects are entering into our near-Earth's atmosphere at about 80 miles out, that potentially they then adopt the actual Earth's frequency as they travel. And either for the idea of potentially either cloaking themselves from being picked up on sophisticated radar, or potentially even some kind of communication the idea that they literally know that they can adopt our own Earth's resonance to give us the idea that they are sentient beings themselves that know the difference between traveling in a straight line and adopting the Earth's magnetic resonance itself. So that's what we've been finding out lately on some of our Skywatch videos that you'll see up there at UFOI Team on Facebook.
Yeah, it almost sounds like you're saying that these crafts are actually a living organism if they are making some kind of conscious decision to imitate Earth's sound waves.
Yeah, that's a great analysis as well, because I don't know how many experiencers I've heard that have claimed to be abductees, maybe even flown in these ships, that say that these things seem to be alive. They seem to meld in with the people who are operating them, the entities that are operating with them. That's you've heard the term where people will put their hands on some kind of a surface on the object, and it actually follows their thought patterns, as far as traveling. You wonder if that's the case, that maybe these craft are some kind of hybrid technology and biology at the same time.
Yeah, that thought has to cross one's mind. And since we are getting into some weird stuff like that, except for the Canadian geese, but this is a not normal conversation that most people have, but with information like we've discussed tonight with the Roswell crash and the living flying things, since you were a vice president of a Christian college, is it a paradox to get into studying these unusual topics and still profess to have a faith?
That's a great question, Mark. Myself, I don't believe it's a paradox. I've always been a faith-based guy my whole life, raised as in the Methodist church, growing up, and was involved in my youth group, in church. And then, of course, as I got older in life, I actually attended a Pentecostal church for over a couple decades and was in the church choir, very involved as well. And, of course, as you mentioned, I was vice president of Puget Sound Christian College here in the Seattle area as well. But, I had always been that interesting kid in Sunday school that would be asking the strange questions like, gosh, there's some really interesting stuff in the Bible, the Old Testament, the New Testament. And I'd always be asking about Ezekiel's wheel, to the Sunday school teacher, and the whole idea of Genesis 4, where the sons of God are taking the daughters of man and having children that are giants, and all those kinds of things. So I don't think it's out of line at all to talk about the supernatural in the sacred scriptures. Literally, there are ghosts and giants and witches and all sorts of aerial activity and phenomena that are unexplained in the Bible that are kind of skirted over in most cases, of course. When you go to your normal church service down in the corner of the Baptist church or whatever and hear the local sermon. So I've always been interested in that. Then when I went to law school, I of course carried that over my interest in the paranormal and the Fortean over into literally helping people and organizations that were involved in the paranormal as well. I've represented many clients over the years, all the way back to Dr. James Harder in the APRO, Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, back in the 70s, and all the way up to the present day with Chief Petty Officer Kevin Day and the Nimitz veterans as well. Nimitz and Princeton folks, a lot of those guys at UAPX are my clients as well, including Peter Davenport and the National UFO Reporting Center. So I've really had a really amazing experience being able to combine my interests with my profession as well, being a lawyer now for over 35 years and also a retired Superior Court judge, pro tem.
Cause the about with the this example seems, I don't know what else to call it. You also have zombies and red hallucinogenic type character appearing in Revelation. It just seems like these unexplained phenomena documented ever since could rise, and before that, chiseling the same just stories into the side of a pyramid or rock outcropping or something like that. It's like it's been here that's little outside of our standing.
Yeah, gosh, you're breaking up a little bit, Mark, here, but I think I can comment on what you just said. Literally, the whole idea of each denomination here on our small little planet trying to explain the whole idea of the source, God, is very difficult, I think, from our perspective. I mean, given the fact that literally our small section of the universe is just a small sliver of what the entire universe looks like. It's like, the movie Contact when Jodie Foster's character says, it seems like a real waste of space out there if we're the only life that exists. That's the truth, I really believe. I think that our sacred scriptures are just our small attempt to explain the whole idea of a concept of a God that is much bigger, much, much bigger than any denomination on our planet is giving it credit for at this point. I mean, indeed, if you just think of the Hubble deep field photograph alone, the fact that they decided at one point to take the Hubble telescope, focus it in on a very dark area of the night sky, and try to illuminate it as much as possible to see if there was anything out there. And I understand it was about the width of a dime held at arm's length that they tried to focus on. And when they finally processed all of that light emissions into an actual photograph, it showed literally thousands and thousands of galaxies where we thought there was just blank space out there. So if indeed we have trillions and trillions of galaxies, and our galaxy alone is 100,000 light years across, oh my, gives you an idea how large God really is.
So with all of this vast amount of space within the universe. When you said 100,000 light years across, and there are, different, living humanoids and beings out there. There is a need for some kind of law and order. And I know you want to get into talking about space law. Is that a new field, or was something established? Just say like in 1969 with the moon landing, and it's just been slowly progressing since then. We got the new space program that was announced a few months ago. Is there some type of quorum that is formulating space laws?
I don't know that there is officially. I have always thought that is something that we need to head towards myself. I've actually coined the term exojurisprudence in that regard, kind of like exopolitics, the whole idea that, we have to reach out into the cosmos at one point with our man-made systems to correspond or at least communicate with whatever cosmic community is out there. And I would imagine at one point we are very quickly, I think, going to have to deal with the idea that other life forms on other planets out there, and maybe even our near universe, will be interacting with us. And of course, our 10 Commandments, our Maharabic Code, all these things that have come from common law that we are used to as far as our own earth-based legal systems, might have to be tweaked a bit, or at least interacted with in other legal systems. So I thought that was always something that I would be interested in doing. And my local bar association here in the state of Washington actually was kind enough to do a really well-balanced and nice article in the monthly newsletter that goes out to all the legal professionals in the state, including all the attorneys. And they monikered me in that letter, in that article, the Paranormal Lawyer. So I literally had brought up the idea that, we need to start thinking about these things. If indeed, at one point, the government is poised upon the tract of saying, well, guess what? There are some life out there on other planets, and we're probably going to have to deal with them. I don't want to be behind the 8 ball, in that regard. I want to be forward-thinking and coming up with some kind of a plan to, it's like the old Star Trek or this Star Wars scenario where you're sitting around, that bar, with people from different planets and different characters. They all have their own legal systems that they come from. And if you basically cross one of their, their own legal problems or issues and stuff, that real quickly, and you might not have known about it ahead of time. So something to think about. I think it's very fascinating to think that we are literally, as an organization, a society on our planet, now getting close to actually reaching off planet and being involved in whatever is out there in our cosmic neighborhood, I believe.
Yeah, well, there are obviously the night. Okay, go ahead, Barbara. Step in.
as far as law goes, how would you determine whose law you would be adhering to, assuming that this other culture had laws of their own?
Yeah, great question, Barb. Matter of fact, that kind of brings up, in my mind, the whole idea of this Greada Treaty. I don't know if you remember this whole idea where supposedly President Eisenhower, was supposedly meeting with a contingent of off-world extraterrestrials at one of the Air Force bases, and they actually came up with the idea of some kind of a treaty, supposedly. This is the story, that, they would allow these off-world entities to study us, potentially abduct a few of us on the planet, as long as they provided us with a up-to-date list of the people that they were experimenting on and looking into. And in return, we were going to get, I believe, in that treaty, some technical expertise that they had that we did not have. So, of course, the theory is, the story is on that thing, is that the Greada Treaty was quickly broached or breached by one side or maybe even both sides of the agreement. So, you would think, you're right. Is there a prime directive out there that would be overarching, in this regard, or whose canon of law do you follow in which jurisdiction?
Or is there a cosmic law that overrides it all that we don't even know about?
Exactly. What if there is a ultimate 10 commandments, or maybe more or less than 10, that we have no clue about at this point, that will basically turn our own legal system upside down, potentially. We might have to be thinking things through a little bit differently if we understand that we might be in a minority position with our own legal system.
Or would the first thing we had to do would be to send a whole bunch of you guys to school in another galaxy to learn what the laws are that we're going to have to abide by?
Oh, Barb, can you imagine the bar exam that you'd have to pass for that thing? Holy mackerel. Oh, my
stop
goodness.
And think about it. If you're going to school in another galaxy or wherever, a lot of it would be telepathic. A lot of it would be downloads of information into you consciously. You could probably do the whole thing in a couple of hours. And then you'd have
fascinating.
School cannot possibly be the same. I mean, it's antiquated as it is. So
yeah,
there has to be. I mean, we're getting into technology and stuff like that, especially with all of this. The kids are going to school, on computers. So the next thing would be to hop it up another level and do away with the computers and use just telepathic communication, which we're capable of. We just don't use.
Well, that's a great idea. By the way, Grant Cameron, one of my illustrious clients, have always said that he particularly gets downloads of massive amounts of information that he doesn't know where they come from. Can you imagine potentially being downloaded the cosmic code from another legal system in an overnight session?
Alpha Centauri, sure.
I was lucky enough to cram 3 years of law school into 2, but I can't imagine doing it overnight like that. That would just be a freaky situation, waking up with a whole nother mindset, of a download from another legal system. I would kind of look forward to that, actually.
I mean, I've had downloads, but not of a whole thing like a legal system or whatever. But it really is amazing to suddenly know something that you didn't know when you went to sleep. That's a cool thing. So I think we're going to have to adjust our educational system to be able to cope with something that is above what we've got now. I don't think
Yeah.
we're even close to it.
And in reality, that brings up the whole idea of the difference between actually learning something versus being able to use it in practicality. One of the things in school is supposedly they give you some kind of practice in what you needed to know and how to use it. Otherwise, it would be very interesting to see how a brand new newbie in a download experience is able to actually carry out the knowledge that they learn so quickly without the corresponding experience in being able to gather that information. So that's a whole new learning curve that we're going to have to get used to as well.
Yeah, but knowledge and wisdom are two different things. One, you're a parent, and the other, you're a prophet. You're able to utilize this information. So it's a matter of not just memorizing it, but to knowing what it means. That'd be interesting.
And that would very closely track with the whole idea of what they're talking about with AI. The whole idea of biological kind of confluence with the artificial intelligence as well. If you could at least have a knowledge, but then also be able to download the experience as well into someone's mind, that would make all the difference in the world in learning, obviously.
Maybe. AI doesn't have a spirit, so it's artificial, therefore not sentient. So
yes,
that could be dangerous, because if we gave AI too much power, they might decide they didn't need humans anymore, and then we'd be up a creek.
Oh, I think we're well on that road at this point. We're going to have to be very vigilant that we don't become irrelevant as human beings, for sure.
Yeah, it's kind of like we could be the virus.
Oh, very great analogy. Yes, and I can see the movie now. Human beings being sought out by AI as the virus trying to stamp us out. Yeah.
Well, isn't that what the Terminator was?
Oh,
the machines were taking over. That's exactly what the Terminators were. And I've always believed that science fiction was preparing us for reality that was to come. So, watch out.
But what if it turns out that it's all just been a flock of Canadian geese? That's the twist ending.
Could be.
I always keep that in the back of my mind, Mark, is the fact that all these strange phenomena that I've been so fascinated with my whole life, from Bigfoot to ghosts to UFOs and cryptids, all those kind of things, you always wonder if indeed there ends up being a very good explanation that's not as strange as we thought, how I would react to that as well. Because you got to think of it both ways. How would I handle the idea that there is life on other planets and extraterrestrials are visiting our planet? Or what if indeed we are the only things in the universe? If you can't wrap your head around both of those, you're probably not, discerning as far as what information you're obtaining. And once you can, give up an agenda either way, then you start gathering the real information.
Mm-hmm. I agree with what you're saying. You just have to see multiple sides, not your agenda. And when you're representing the Nimitz crew as a paranormal lawyer, what was their experience? We've had some sea monster stories that we don't understand everything that's so far beneath the surface of the oceans. What did the Nimitz crew see? How did they get you involved in the need to represent them?
Well, great question. Let's just go through the story real quickly if people aren't up to speed on the USS Nimitz UFO encounter of 2004. This is a fascinating subject. Okay. Of course, it came out on the front page of the New York Times December 16th of 2017 when we finally found out about this Nimitz UFO encounter that happened in 2004. But basically what happened was the USS Nimitz carrier group, which is a series of 6 or 7 ships and a submarine and fighter jets, and everybody was out doing some exercises off of the coast of California, San Diego, the Catalina Island area, in November of 2004, when Kevin Day, Chief Petty Officer Kevin Day, who was running the radar ship, the USS Princeton at the time, started seeing these flights of strange anomalous returns going north to south, maybe 5, 10 at a time, very slowly, by the way, only about 200 miles an hour in traveling over the surface of the ocean, anywhere from 20,000 feet down to the surface of the ocean, in flights that were going by literally for 10 days. And finally, he got to the point where he had to bring that up to his ship captain, who said, "Well, what are they?" And he said, "I don't know what they are. This is new returns got from the brand new, at the time, Spy 1 radar system that had just been applied to the USS Princeton." And of course, they have AWACS up in the airplanes as well with radar dishes on them. And so they have a full coverage of the area there. They're seeing these things. They decided to send the software of the radar system, Spy 1 radar, in for overhaul just to take a look at it, see if there was any problems with the returns. Indeed, when they got the system back within the next day or two, there was nothing wrong with the system, and they started continuing to see more and more flights of these UFOs that were seemingly looking the same. Literally, they are estimating about 46 feet in length, shaped exactly like a Tic Tac breath mint, with no aerial surfaces, no exhaust plumes, no nothing, flying by over the surface of the ocean while they were doing their exercises off the southwest coast of San Diego. Finally, Chief Officer Day says to his captain, "We should send somebody out there just to check this out." And it did seem to correspond at one point to Commander David Fravor's flight plan, with he and his wingman, 2 different FA-18 fighter jets are scheduled to go up. And so they decided to vector these 2 airplanes in the vicinity of a couple of those returns that they had been following for the previous few days. So when they sent them up there, they, of course, Commander Fravor had no idea where he was going or what he was going for. They were initially thinking that they were being vectored potentially for maybe an interdiction drug run or something going off on off the coast that they needed to look into. And so when they got there, they didn't know what to look for, but the first thing that called their attention to something strange was the fact that there was a major disturbance on the surface of the ocean. Commander Fravor, I guess, was about 20,000 feet at that point, going to this vector spot that they were sending him to, when they finally hit to the point where they called a merge plot, where the radar, which is up in the sky, and the ship radar on the Princeton can see that the jets are right there at the vector spot where this unidentified object is. Commander Fravor looks down and sees that there is a boiling happening on the surface of the ocean. There is white water seemingly boiling in a large area that looks like a huge oval, maybe the size of what he thought would be a 747 jetliner. And he's thinking that maybe this a commercial jet that had gone down into the ocean, and these were the bubbles and results of a crashed airplane, commercial airplane. So he decided to go down to investigate at the surface of the ocean level, and kept his wingmen up in the 20,000-foot level to keep an eye on things. And by the way, his wingman for this exercise was a woman pilot who was relatively new, but she had also a person in the back seat they call the WISO seat, the weapons information officer in the back seat there that was quite experienced as well. So both those pilots were staying up high. Commander Fravor and his WISO were going down low. When they got very close to the surface of the ocean, Commander Fravor is claiming that he saw what looked like a giant tic-tac shaped object about the size of his own airplane, the FA-18 fighter. And literally he says that this object was behaving like he had never seen any kind of an object behave before. Literally, he said, it looked like a ping pong ball, just bouncing back and forth at the bottom of a jar or glass so quickly that it didn't change its velocity when it changed its position or direction. He couldn't believe anything could be doing what this was doing. And while he was spiraling down to get a closer look, all of a sudden he realizes that this object stops over the hovering, foaming ocean and literally locks on to his own jet. He says at one point, I'm engaged. This thing has got me in a lock. And literally for I don't know how many minutes, Commander Fravor is corkscrewing down to the surface of the ocean. And this object now is corkscrewing up from the surface of the ocean to meet Commander Fravor in a clockwise kind of a dogfight that literally, if he was at 10 o'clock, the object was at, let's say, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. It would kept the opposite side of the circle as they're getting closer and closer. Commander Fravor then says that he literally got within about a half a mile, which is not very far when you're in an FA-18 jet, between him and this object that was now at his same height and altitude. When initially this thing just took off and zipped by his canopy of his FA-18 jet so fast he couldn't even conceive of anything going that quickly. And that was the USS Nimitz UFO encounter that was literally then caught on tape later on by another flight of FA-18s who literally found that tic-tac UFO and took the FLIR photography videos that we see all over the internet. But I'll finish that story with a real fascinating ending to that, because in reality, Commander Fravor it was just gobsmacked at the time that this happened. He said, it's gone. Gets on the radio. He's talking with, his commanding officers and the folks back on the Princeton, and says, well, okay, I'm just going to go back to my original position and get ready for our exercise that we're going to do for the rest of the afternoon. When all of a sudden, someone from the radar ship, the Princeton, says, Commander, you're not going to believe this. She says, that tic-tac UFO is now waiting for you at your cap point. And the cap point was where they were supposed to start this whole event of their, maneuvers, which was about 60 to 80 miles to the north of them. And the fact that this UFO even knew where their cap point was and was waiting for them to arrive there just blew everyone away. That is the fascinating short story of the Nimitz UFO encounter.
Okay, so that seems like we're back to these crafts seem like they're alive. They almost have ESP.
Some kind of communication, you would think, either electronically.
Yeah. For
some reason, they had an idea of what was programmed into the jet, where they were supposed to go, or telepathically. You're right. It's very fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are a few possibilities there. It's back to another example of how do you explain that? They just seem like the UFOs were one step ahead of the humans.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Matter of fact, the story does not end there for the U.S. Nimitz UFO encounter, because a lot of people don't know the rest of the story. But later on that evening, after the Tic Tac UFO footage was captured on FLIR photography, after everything had settled down that evening, literally there was a synchronistic event that happened on the USS Nimitz, where one of the sailors working off the back deck, putting all of the FA-18 jets away in the hangar underneath the deck, fell off the ship that night. It was dark. It was late. And the ship went into high emergency mode to try to make sure they didn't lose this Navyman. And in reality, they had difficulty getting their rescue boat up in line to go out and get this gentleman, who was, of course, bobbing in the ocean with his life preservers on, and his light that was keeping an eye, or a light was letting people know where he was, and there were gentlemen on the deck underneath with binoculars keeping an eye on him. When in reality, what happened was another Tic Tac UFO, bright, came and hovered over this Navy person in the ocean, and was just waiting there for someone to come and rescue him, which eventually it happened to happen. But it was almost a strange event that this same kind of craft, Tic Tac shape, that was seen through binoculars and through there's the officers that were trying to rescue this person in the ocean. It was literally hovering over this gentleman all the time that he was out there waiting to be rescued. That's a fascinating part of the story people don't really know about because it hasn't been talked about a lot.
Okay, what? It's the first time I've heard it. What you were just mentioning with the hovering over a person, that can go back to what could be, the Star of Bethlehem could be misidentified as a UFO hovering over the manger.
Bingo. You got it. That's one of those things I always thought about as a kid, going, wow, so this star moved, huh? And it led the wise men through the desert to a small little stable. That's a fascinating story. I love it.
But it's in both cases, you have the UFO as being almost like a protector, something hovering over someone in need. So it's just
yes, exactly.
Very interesting.
And here's the thing: I would love to be able to interview, or at least hear an interview with that rescued sailor of what he saw and experienced out there alone in the middle of the ocean with a Tic Tac UFO hovering over him. Wouldn't that have been an amazing story to hear?
Why does the crew need to hire you as a paranormal lawyer to get their word out? Is that like breaking military confidentiality?
No, not
codes.
Great question, Mark. All of them are retired, of course, from the military at this point. But at one point, I had been contacted through, I think, mutual clients of mine. Grant Cameron introduced me to Petty Officer Kevin Day, Chief Officer Kevin Day, and literally he wanted to get together a group of his veteran buddies to literally go back out again to see if they could, with sophisticated gear, find these Tic Tac UFOs again off the coast of Catalina Island in San Diego. So I contacted me to help him put together a nonprofit corporate entity that they could literally have a business entity put together so they can get some gear together. They can get a couple ships literally with the equipment that they need to go back out again. And they are planning, this is UAPX, by the way. It's the organization called UAPX, and you can find them on Facebook and YouTube and all over the internet, because they are planning again to take out some sophisticated camera gear, electronic, probes and those kinds of things, even sonar, by the way, because indeed the USS Nimitz was accompanied by a submarine that literally caught one of those Tic Tac UFOs traveling at superior speeds under the water as well. So all of that gear is being planned to go back out potentially in December of this year if everything works out well. And of course, there have been many production companies and different channels out there on cable that have been trying to put together or want to put together a production of them preparing to do this and actually pulling this off. So they've been needing some contract reviews and help in that regard as well. They have a really great Hollywood agent by the name of Dave Altman who has been helping them navigate the Hollywood production company process as well, as these veterans are being now inundated with the idea that people want to find out exactly what they're doing and planning for this coming wintertime, which, by the way, seems to have corresponded to the whale migrations off the coast of California as well. So the theory could be that there is some interest in these UFOs and the whale migrations, or who knows, maybe they're even communicating with the sentient species on the planet, the whales as well. So that's what we're kind of keeping that in mind.
Wow. Okay, that would be some interesting research if UFOs have switched from how stupid many humans are to studying whales.
Exactly. I mean, who knows where we stack up on the sentient level here on the planet if indeed whales are much smarter than we are in dealing with extraterrestrials. Who knows? I mean, it's been fascinating in that regard. Another interesting thing that we've been able to do with the idea that the whale migrations might have something to do with the flights and timing of these Tic Tac UFOs is the group that I have founded and direct to the UFO I-Team. We have technical gear that is really sophisticated ourselves, and one of the things that we have from a inventor member of our team called Dave Mason is he has invented a pair of high-powered binoculars that can turn light frequency into sound and literally put that sound on an oscilloscope to compare it with known sounds, known frequency, so we can determine if an object in a night sky is an anomalous object or if it's a shooting star or a satellite. We can determine that now. And in reality, what Dave Mason has now allowed us to do is he can take that sound signature and actually turn it back into light frequency, and he can broadcast it in a diffused laser straight back to the source. So that brings up the whole idea of potential CE5 connections where human-initiated contact with extraterrestrials could potentially happen with electronic devices that we've come up with. Now, when I heard Dave Mason and his new invention come forth on the I-Team with this new gear, I said, Dave, have you heard that the USS Nimitz guys have found out that those flights of Tic Tac UFOs may correspond to the whale migrations in the area off the coast of San Diego at the time? What if, since you have this capability, what if you could broadcast whale sounds into the night sky? What would that do? What could we do with that? And could potentially we pick up some extra anomalous objects? And indeed, that's what we are doing now with Dave Mason's technology. We literally have been broadcasting whale and dolphin sounds into the night sky in a diffused laser. It's not necessarily in a shotgun mode, but we can target it to certain sections of the night sky. And literally we have caught on videotape at the UFO I-Team Facebook page, tic-tac shaped and other shaped UFOs corresponding to the broadcast that we're making of whale sounds into the night sky. So that's just another further conundrum that we're running across here, and this whole idea of potential alien contact or off-planet contact with extraterrestrial sources.
Well, you're always welcome to come back and tell us about your conclusions.
Oh, definitely. Wouldn't that be fun if we, when the UAPX folks get some more scientific data, and that's what they're all about, is literally gathering the data one way or another of what's going to happen when they go back out with this sensitive gear and equipment that will manifest itself above and beyond what the Spy 1 radar had at that point. We will definitely want to contact you again and get back on the air and tell you what our findings are.
Hey, Michael.
Yeah, well,
wasn't one of the Star Trek movies about going into the past and getting whales and bringing them back to the future?
You got it. Wasn't that a great episode? Oh, my goodness. I was really interested in the theory of that happening well before, by the way, that Star Trek film, happening well before what happened to the Tic Tac UFO Nimitz encounter. It's like you said, Barb, it's like Hollywood is kind of like forecasting what reality is doing.
Definitely.
And you know, last week, I think it was, well, it was either Zelia or Steve. It was, we were talking about the John Keel was doing something similar by communicating with UFOs over the Ohio River by just turning on and off his headlights. It's very rudimentary to the gadgets you're using, but it's basically the same point as using electronic communication to send Morse code to a UFO to descend, and that's what it did.
Yes, exactly. As a matter of fact, that is the classic CE5 close encounters of the fifth kind scenario, human-initiated contact with anomalous objects. The idea that actually one of my clients, Dr. Richard Haynes, who is the chief scientist from NASA, who also ran the NARCAP agency, which was the pilot reporting agency for UFOs for many years. He wrote the book on CE5 and coined that term, the idea that people literally have for decades initiated contact with lights, different sources of communication, and received corresponding signals back from alien craft. As a matter of fact, on the UFO I-Team Facebook page, Lee Strauss, one of our intrepid cameramen, has got an amazing video that literally he interacts with an anomalous aerial object multiple times, 3 or 4 times, asking it verbally to flare up on tape. And it does right after he's asking it to do it in not rhythmic mode, but arrhythmic mode. So it couldn't be just something that happens without him asking it to flare up. So those things are classic as far as people's ability to have return communication with extraterrestrial, potentially craft.
Yeah, neat. It's just fascinating material. And Michael, we have just a few more minutes with you. Find a quick question. You recently got together with Clifford Mahooty and Daryl Sims. They're some leading researchers. I've had a chance to talk with Clifford briefly. He brings a unique perspective with his heritage. What have you learned from Clifford? He's frequently on the lecture circuit and very very knowledgeable about a lot of UFO information in the desert Southwest area.
Yes, of course. I was lucky enough to be able to appear with Clifford Mahooty at the Quinault Beach UFO Paranormal Conference just recently here at the first part of March before everything shut down. It was probably the last major UFO paranormal gathering before the coronavirus shut everyone down, and had a wonderful time be able to have lunch and hang out with Clifford, who is a Zuni American Indian elder, and was able to relate to all of us during the conference and myself in private conversations about the idea that the American Indians, the indigenous people of our country, literally have had relationships with these entities, these craft, as well as potentially Bigfoot as well. The actual, hominids on the planet that they literally had been sharing their space with, in the Southwest and all over the United States, obviously with other tribes as well. So he is a very, by the way, I didn't realize that Clifford Mahooty literally is a civil engineer himself. He is quite highly educated within the culture of the white man, but he maintains his indigenous culture and is kind of I think a conduit between the two cultures in explaining what really has been happening on our planet that has kind of been covered up by mainstream media and science over the years.
Yeah, I just got the impression of him that he's a very humanitarian person with his engineering and working with so many people to bridge the gap of understanding. A gentleman with a brief conversation I had with him.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, great guy to talk to. Who loves to spend time with you, and very sincere person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Daryl Sims has been, pioneer in the screen memory. Is that correct?
Oh, yes. Screen memories and alien implant removals and detection as well. He was the gentleman who actually got Dr. Roger Lear involved in the whole idea of alien implant retrieval as well. So Daryl Sims is a great hero of mine, the alien hunter, they call him, from the great state of Texas. And it was great to hang out with Daryl as well at the Quinault Beach UFO Summit just this last March as well.
Okay. Mike, I don't know how much time you have remaining, let's say about 5 minutes. Is there anything you want to plug? Want to just make sure you have plenty of time to do that?
Oh, thank you so much, Mark. And Barb, I've really enjoyed hanging out with you guys here for the last couple of hours. This has been very, I think, informative, hopefully, for your listeners and even myself, being able to talk with knowledgeable hosts and folks like yourself that have been in this field for so long. Gosh, I love it. We'll have to do it again. I really appreciate the invite back. And we would just like to ask people if they want, they can go to the UFO I-Team on Facebook. They can go to our YouTube page, UFO I-Team, and UFOIteam.com as well on the internet, just to find out what we're doing lately. My own Facebook page is Michael W. Hall, the Paranormal Lawyer as well. They can go there and find most of the same things. And gosh, it's been fun. I can't believe 2 hours has gone by already, but like I mentioned earlier, I literally have to do an episode of another show right now in the next 5 minutes, so I better get off here and let them be able to contact me so I can get on for another couple hours tonight. So it's going to be a long, fun night for me.
Okay. What show are you going to be on so people can go from us to the other? Oh, gosh. Well,
thank you for that. It's going to be Midnight in the Desert tonight that I'll be on. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to that. That's going to be Midnight in the Desert starting in about 10 minutes, looks like. And Tim Weisberg is the host, of course, tonight on that show. So we'll be getting into maybe some of the things that we've talked about already, but hopefully get into some different subjects on Midnight in the Desert as well.
Okay. And Barbara, do you want to wrap up anything?
Yes, I'll be happy to wrap up, Mark. Mark and Michael, thank you both so much for giving us an amazing show. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening, and I only had I stopped myself because I got so excited at a couple of places I wanted to put 3 cents worth in, but fascinating information, new stuff that I hadn't heard before, and certainly I am looking forward to having Michael on the Monday night show sometime down the road here, so I can dig in a little deeper and not have to hold my tongue back. It's been a great evening. Thank you both, and thank you everyone for listening and sharing your time with us. We greatly appreciate it. On Thursday at 10 o'clock in the morning, I have Andrew Silverman on the show, so please, if you've got a chance and you have the time, stop in and listen then. Until then, good night, everybody.